Do I think we have one single person in the form of Mr. Burns going, excellent, excellent. Welcome to 33 Tangents, a roundtable discussion covering a wide variety of topics from digital analytics to working remotely to current happenings in business and technology. Your hosts, Jason Thompson, John Naran, Jen Coons, and myself, Jim Driscoll, all live in different areas of the world, but work together in the same company. Our regular day-to-day conversations often go off in various directions, and the goal of this podcast is to share our ideas and find new ways to engage with others.
Something just happened. Something weird just happened. Now it's back.
What's
I
that?
don't know. It sounded like someone was in a tunnel or something.
Oh. Nope, everything sounds good to me.
So
But it's
what's
funny,
the topic?
all of this bickering, this friendly...
Settle down, Bryant. Like we're easing into it here. So
Is
What's
he
the
talking?
topic?
Because I can't hear him.
I can hear him.
You can't hear me now, Jim?
Now I can, if you were talking a moment ago.
He was just talking really, really softly.
Okay. But all of this friendly bickering actually gives me a great way to get into our topic today. Because in a recent episode, Jason, you and I had Dan Roden on with us, and we were
Yeah.
talking about trust culture. Building a culture of a trust in an organization, which is taboo for many, right? So I want to kind of continue on with that and cover another business taboo today, which is getting personal. Making business personal. It's kind of it's one of your missions. There's a common belief that a business needs to be formal, cold, boring. So let's talk about what it means to make business personal, what benefits can be seen, and why some people try to shy away from it.
Yeah. So I think a lot of us, we came up in this this belief that you play a role when it comes to business. You have your personal life, you have your work life, and those are two separate things. And that you keep those things separate. You don't bring personal things to work, and it's just not a reality, right? And I don't know if it's the changing landscape of business with things becoming a little bit fuzzier, or if it just always was the case and we rejected it. But the reality is we're people, and to pretend that we're not is really, really difficult. And so for me, it's one of the key things that we chose and choose to focus on is building out the culture of 33 Sticks. Is that not only is it important, it's central to what we do, that we take business personally. And if that means being open to having conversations with our clients, whether that's being more open internally, and we've talked about the concept of family, all those things do tend to be taboo, or it puts people in an uncomfortable space. And we've had a lot of feedback to that extent. We've heard you can't look at it like a family. That's dangerous. They're just employees. You're just a business. We've talked with people who have pushed back with being open with the people you work with and say, you can't discuss personal things with them. It's not for you to know that your clients are celebrating a big birthday milestone and going on a hike in the Appalachians, and they're really like, that's not to know. Just do the work and then get back to your personal self.
Well, and unless you're an executive, it seems like the executives at companies can do that more frequently than just
So-
the average person.
So do you think
But
it's
they
about
do
control
that in
then?
they do that in like the really public meetings, or like all hands or things like that.
So it's fake.
I don't know. I'm just saying that I've seen that.
Interesting. So do you think that it comes down to, I guess, then two things? One, do you think they're doing that as a way to seem more human to their employees? And or do you think it's a way that if it's okay for a certain level to be personal and others not, is it about control that we can't trust just any normal employee to be human and have human interactions with people that interact with our business?
I don't think I know the why behind either of them. Um, I've I've always been much more personal with how I've handled myself in organizations and companies, regardless of what level I was at. But it just is interesting because I would see executives do that quite a bit. Um,
Hmm.
and then employees just at various levels kind of feel stifled in their ability to do client facing or whatnot for whatever reason.
So I'd be interested in your take on that, in that you've worked for some larger agencies in your career. My experience has primarily been with smaller agencies, so I'm interested in kind of your perspective, as far as whether it was directly communicated about how you should engage with your clients, or if it was just kind of assumed that there's certain ways that you're supposed to engage and certain ways that you're not.
So thinking back to strictly agency when I was working there, it actually was a much more fluid and human and personal culture at that company. Even given the size of it, which was north of 1,000 employees when I was there. They're even bigger now, but um, didn't matter if it was a developer or if it was a lead designer or an account manager. There was much more of a focus on having real personal connections with clients, and that was part of the culture of that agency. Um, and I've seen that similarly at other partners. When I was at Adobe, and working at different on sites with different clients that I was working with, I would see a spectrum. Some consultants actually seemed very good at being very personal. Others felt like they kind of needed to wear the suit both visually and socially, with how they would act. And over the past, I'd say maybe decade or so, I have seen a trend more so that people are loosening up and not trying to put on an act or a show beyond what they actually are, from a personality standpoint for the sake of trying to impress a client.
Yeah, I think a lot of it. I think a lot of it may be a millennial thing, and again, I hate to over kind of generalize, but with that segment, it's a much different way that they view business, and it's interesting the changes and the waves that are being pushed through business. So I have a question for both of you. Thinking through the potential drawbacks and maybe why businesses and individuals for that matter may be hesitant to kind of put themselves out there as Jim or as Bryant. Have you ran into situations in the past where being open and kind of being human cause potential problems, either with a client or with a colleague or maybe someone in management, where maybe it was something that you shared or something, and it didn't go over well and it caused problems?
Well, I've seen it in a couple cases, and you could probably say maybe this isn't being personal in the context that we're talking about, but I've seen it a couple times where maybe those that were young in their career went out, went out with, say maybe some more of the senior members of the team to treat clients like dinner and drinks, and because they were still fairly new to it, things maybe got a little too personal, right? Or a little too casual, and maybe they were just too young in their career. So maybe that's more of a. The more I think about it, the more I talk about it. Maybe that was more of a mentoring thing. They just hadn't been experienced to that. So I think the drawback is there is if you have someone say earlier in their career, more more on the green side of things, when it comes to whether it's taking a client out to woo them a bit with dinner and drinks or something like that, really pulling a person aside and saying, like, this is how you make sure things don't get too out of control. You go out, you have a good time, but like don't let things go beyond that. So I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. Was I've seen it where like that it got it got a little away, the situation got away from people.
Do you think part of it is that businesses fear taking any kind of position on things, and being personal kind of potentially puts you in that position to be in a different group versus not? So again, you see a lot of businesses, whether it's political or otherwise, they just we don't take a stance. Um, and it seems like the safe way. But on the flip side, you see companies like Patagonia and others that, like, we don't give a crap. We're taking a stance. And do you think part of that kind of goes to influence this whole personal thing that, it's we're just robotic. We're just doing tasks. We don't have a stance. We don't have thoughts about things. We don't want to risk people being upset because Jim is a Philly sports fanatic, and we like the Cowboys or something.
Yeah. So I mean, I think in
and
some
that's
cases,
a stupid
yes.
example, but
Yeah, but no, I think you bring up a good point. Like, I think in certain cases, yes, like it's being very agnostic, and I can argue pros and cons to that, especially in today's polarizing political atmosphere. That might be something where that's like that's too sensitive a situation where with what we're producing, with what our product is, political stances it doesn't matter what the political stance of someone is, either us or the consumer. So we're just going to stay out of that. We're here to provide a service, and again, I think today's political atmosphere is way too polarized. That I think depending upon your product, it may be better to do that. But I think in other cases, I think it's to keep things simpler. God, man, I'm tongue tied at the moment. Like, there's a couple things I want to say and I can't get it out. I think politics aside, it's just with that particular thing, it's such a sensitive topic that I can't fault someone for saying, you know what, as a company, we are politically agnostic. We're going to keep our beliefs to ourselves. Whereas with other things, I think it's almost to like dehumanize, like the stuff that may be trivial, staying out of that. That is to maybe just dehumanize the situation. You give us money, we give you product, we pay our employees, and we're done.
yeah.
I don't know. That probably didn't answer your question. That just probably muddied the water even more.
No, it's fine. So I guess a follow-up question that I have is, how do we think through it in a way where we're being, what's the right word, considerate to maybe other ways that people view things? Because I'll admit, there are things that I see that to me just make perfect sense, and it's not until I say it out loud and someone's like, what the hell are you talking about, that it forces me to think, okay, maybe that isn't as clear and doesn't make as much sense as I think it does. And just recently we had the conversation about unlimited PTO, and to me I'm like, this is a no-brainer. Like, I think we're using this and it's working amazing, and I put it out there and all I get is like, you're an idiot. Like, this is a scam. You're screwing your employees over. They hate it. They're just not going to tell you. I'm like, whoa, really? Like, I had no idea. Right? And the same with this. We've talked about this this conversation that I had where I was on a conference call, and I brought up a personal story with one of the other attendees, and after the call, he pulled me aside and said, dude, like, don't bring up personal stories this is business. Like, you don't talk about business. I'm like, and it just like was like a boot to the head. I'm like, I never thought about that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we shouldn't be having these type of conversations.
No, and I think that's a little different from what we were just talking about, and bringing certain things in. Like to me, that you and I have talked about that situation a couple times, and to me, it's always just been natural. Like I was thinking back to a couple things before we jumped on, and for me, it's always been just like a natural habit to bring those conversations or bring those topics into a conversation. And I think in many ways it's helped diffuse situations, and it also kind of brings levity to sometimes some really stressful situations. Um, but again, I think the reason why I think some to me it's natural to do that. To me, it's natural to describe things like, I'll go to an example. So I've been open about how, my wife and I, we had to go through for fertility treatment. We ran into fertility issues, and the more you start talking about it, you realize that several other people have done that. And I'm like, our journey was not nearly as complex as some others was, but it was still a journey we had to go through. And I share it with people. Well, a year and a half ago, as we were starting to go through that, I'm up with a client. We're having lunch. We're talking. I say something. They kind of look at me, and I'm like, "All right, this may get a little personal, but here's a situation." And they're all, they're looking at me like, "Oh, I know someone who had to go through that," and they were actually very supportive of it.
I mean, we're all people, right?
Yeah,
we're all people.
And you would think, I mean, that'd be the same situation. You would think some people would pull you aside and say, you don't talk about that in front of a client. And I was just back up there again like 3-4 weeks ago, and they had a little gift for us, to bring home for the baby, and things like that. Yeah, I could see why people shy away from it too, because it makes it very personal when you have to, or it makes it very hard when, say, you have to cut off a relationship or something like that. I think while it may make it tough for that, I think it actually makes having tough conversations which push the relationship further, both the personal relationship and the business relationship, it actually makes it easier. It makes it easier to pull those people aside because you've had other conversations that go beyond just the superficial, in a more friendly context in the past.
And aren't they two separate relationships, two separate things? Like the relationship between, meaning the relationship between companies and the relationship between people are really two separate things. In that, if let's say we cut off a relationship with the company, that's at the company level. But that doesn't necessarily cut off the relationship at the personal level. And the same with the person leaving a company. We've always talked about, it's like, but that we're still connected on that personal level, right?
And I think, and that's honestly, I think you just hit it. That's why people try to avoid it, because they can't separate the two. To them, they're one and the same. So I don't want to have to deal with maybe the stickiness if the business relationship, if that doesn't pan out.
And I think you hit an important nail on the head here. And wouldn't that help explain why business people are so crappy at communication? Because they lack empathy for the other person, because it's like, oh, this is just a business relationship. But if they were able to see it as there's entities that have relationships at a legal level with each other, but we have relationships as humans, and I shouldn't be a shitty human, right? Mm-hmm. But if they're not able to make that disconnection, I can see very well how outside of work they may be a very caring, empathetic person, but once they get inside of work and they put the cape on and the tie and that whatever and the costume, they all of a sudden become a different person, and we don't have to treat people with empathy and respect and kindness because it's just a business relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think you guys are talking about a lot of interesting things, and I think what you're saying, Jason, is really true. Is that if they eliminate the possibility of being personally responsible, and it's only about the bottom line and the dollars and cents, then they can be less emotional about their quote unquote direct conversations, which maybe is a defense mechanism for them to have to feel that empathy. But I think it's really interesting, though, in all of this that we're three individuals that are in technology and specifically consulting technology, and I think we've got a very unique culture just by nature of being in tech that's very different than other industries. My entire career has essentially been in consulting, so I've worked with from healthcare to finance to government to other startups, and it really does seem to be that some industries just don't allow culturally as much personality to be there, because it is a little bit more suit and tie based, or
Are you thinking
um,
finance?
yeah, I mean, finance is a good example where everybody is pretty, for the most part. Again, like all generalities have exceptions, right? But generally speaking, in finance, it's much more dry, and you connect with some individuals here and there, but as an industry, it's just very much business all the time. Um, so
That's
at the same
that sounds depressing.
it at the same time, though, we as consultants, and kind of the reason why I think we've succeeded in our careers and have stayed in the industry of consulting and services is our ability to react to and respond appropriately, depending on what that threshold is with a personality, right? Because there are some people that I've worked with in let's just say healthcare, that I've been able to connect with very personally and have a really awesome relationship with, whereas others aren't. And so I think that's a really interesting thing about our roles, just in general, is our ability to navigate that and have the social intelligence to be able to respond to an individual's needs, or pick up on the nonverbal cues that exist, even on the phone, to be able to know where that threshold is of, can we talk about Jim's fertility stuff versus do they have any interest at all in a surgery that's coming up, or something along those lines.
Don't we crave that? And maybe again, I'm overgeneralizing based on my view of things, but don't we crave that with every service that we, or with most services that we subscribe to? Like, we want there to be some kind of personal level of care and commitment there. Maybe that's an overreach, but I just find that the ones where it seems very shallow and we can't have that depth of conversation, the immediate thing I walk away with is that this relationship just doesn't have much value to it, and therefore whatever we're going to do together has a limit in the value we're going to be able to create.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting into like a really philosophical, deep, like, human need, and I would agree that we do, as humans, crave that and need that. I think uh, there's probably research that's been done into that human uh, emotion and the need for that connection with people. But I think the old school of thought and the business schools have, from my purview, just kind of taught people to be more about the numbers, and look at a case study, and regardless of the human emotions, and look at it, from a legal, not even a moral standpoint. And if things are legal in business, then let's do it. And you then get into the amoral activities that companies will participate in, that have no regard for the humans that are impacted. And I think that they've had to separate it, from their own personal emotions, because if they were to empathize, then probably wouldn't be as aggressive or as assertive, in certain situations.
So you're saying that essentially our path has been laid out before us, and that we're going to maybe not be at the top performers of revenue generation because we have a soul, damn it, but we're going to be happier than everybody else. That's what I think I heard you say.
Yeah, I mean, you're putting a lot of words in my mouth now, but I think that,
No, but you're saying that from a business standpoint, if you really want to look at it as a cold, calculated perspective of the bottom line drives everything, that you can't have it personal, because sometimes you need to make decisions where you don't want to have to be in a position to be empathetic, because that shouldn't factor into your decision. Your decision making should be, is this going to make us more money or not? Full
well,
stop.
I think we're able to operate at a very different scale because we don't have Um, we don't we don't have a leash of investors that are demanding a return at a specific timeline, and we don't have stockholders and shareholders that are demanding things on a quarterly basis, whereas big business does. And I think that drive and the need to survive as a corporation for some of these companies dictates things that are very inhuman in behaviors and decisions that are made, for the sake of keeping that organism known as the corporation alive and thriving and growing and always showing year over year and quarter over quarter growth.
Shout out to Patagonia for rejecting that crappy way of doing business. And you guys are going to talk while I go find the quote.
Yeah. So, Bryant, I also think you brought up something else when you were talking about, like, the amoral stuff that companies do. And I think it's, making, if they don't humanize the customer, they're able to get away with that. Because, I mean, look at all the conversation around vaping today. Are these products safe? Like, they've only been on the market for a few years and are already, people are, appear to be getting sick using them. So if you're a company that has to make money and you're selling a product which right now allegedly is not nearly as healthy as they say it is, not only do you have to dehumanize the customer, I think you have to dehumanize the employee, and to be able to do that. I mean, did I hear you correctly?
Well, I mean, what it's interesting because like there's been a few deaths from vaping, but like thousands of people die every day from cigarette use. So it's interesting, like the lens that's put on a particular new emerging market out there. But
I just brought it up because it was on the news again this morning.
Totally. But I think inherently I think there's a deeper question there of what are you in the business of promoting? And I don't think we should debate the morality of tobacco use or of alcohol or other things potentially here, but if your product is actually causing physical harm to humans, and it's it's a decision that you'd have to make on whether or not you'd be in that business to begin with.
Mm-hmm. No, where I was going with it is that I'm the type of person. Listen, if you want to do something to yourself and knowingly know what it's going to do to you, hey, that's your decision. So yeah, I'm not going. I agree. Let's not. I'm not trying to debate the morality of using those products. What I was getting at and what I thought I heard you say was like, in order for a company to make money selling those products, there has to be a level of dehumanization. And you can't humanize your employees and be close and personal with your employees and then dehumanize your customer. You have to dehumanize everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So Yvonne said on growth, you can grow too fast. A faster a business grows, the faster it dies. And I think that that's part of the problem with a economy that is based on quarterly Wall Street expectations and investor expectations is everything is so short-term focused rather than are we making smart decisions about sustainability. And I think when it comes to building relationships are about long term, right? Like unless we're looking at it as I'm just gonna what's the terminology that Edward Norton used in Fight Club, his single serving friends. Like unless our relationships are single serving, it's just this one interaction and I don't give a crap about you, then I should care about the long term. We should care about are we making decisions to have a sustainable relationship, and a lot of times to do that it's not about necessarily what's best in the here and now, but not to disregard your point, Bryant, in that it is a lot of businesses, a lot of the businesses that we know and buy and interact with are driven based on quarterly results, and I think that changes a lot of the culture of how they look and do business. And I think as employees that has to be potentially really, really challenging. Because as much as people want to say that, we can separate the two and this is just a job, and this is like, how many hours, what percentage of everyone's lives are dedicated to a company? It's tremendously huge, and it just doesn't feel healthy to have that as a role that we don't care about, and maybe we don't care isn't the right word, but to play a part for the vast majority of our time, it just seems like a very depressing way to view life. But then again, I'm not selling billion-dollar companies, so what the hell do I know?
No, I mean, you bring up a good point, and I think, if we want to look at it, I think it's been a slow evolution over the last several decades. Because Jason, let's go back to like one of the early episodes where we talked about like going out and either creating your own business or working for a small company. Because I think you and I got similar advice, and Bryant, I would imagine you got the same advice. I think our generation all got the same advice, where it was like, go out and work for that big company, work for them for 45 years, retire with a nice pension. But really, like, were those people that were given that advice snowed? Because I think for many people, and I think a lot of people are coming to a realization. I think we're hitting on part of it is when you work for a large company, you're just seen as a cog, and a very replaceable cog at that. You decide to leave, and you may think, well, I'm leaving, they'll never replace me. They'll have someone there, most likely within a few weeks, to replace you. So what I think it is I think we've been almost conditioned to work is not meant to be personal, because we're both there. I'm there to get paid, and they're there to get the fruits of my labor, and both of us can replace each other at a moment's notice, instead of working to go and either build something on your own or have something that, and this is not meant to be an insult, but have something, say, like a small company that it's a core group of people that are out to actually produce something worthwhile. Sorry, another rambling rant.
There is a perfect scene from an old Simpsons episode that totally defines this, and if either one of you can read my mind,
Nope.
it would be the most amazing thing ever. Well, you're too young to even know what the Simpsons
What
are.
are you
Brian,
talking
so-
about? The Homer Mobile? Is that what you're talking about?
No.
Oh.
Are you talking about the episode where Homer's counting down the days where he can quit the nuclear plant? It's kind of a flashback to before Maggie was born. So, of course, the day he can quit because they've paid everything off, he, like, literally burns a bridge as he's celebrating leaving and goes to work at the bowling alley.
No, but that's an amazing one. So Flanders, I think, ends up being committed to a mental institution. And
Oh, that's right.
The doctors bring in Homer to talk with him, and Homer says something like, you just can't even insult this guy. You insult him and you call him a moron, and he just sits there grinning moronally. Flanders is the perfect, like, corporate citizen, right? Like, he just plays the role perfectly. And then Homer finally gets to the point where he says, you know what your problem is, Flanders? You're afraid to be human. And he's like, well, why would I be afraid to do that? And Homer's like, because humans are obnoxious sometimes. Humans hate things. Then Flanders says something like, well, maybe a few of them back east. But it's so amazingly insightful and such a great representation that Flanders is the perfect corporate employee, right? It's just this role, and you're starched. Everything is perfect. But you're afraid to be human, right? Like, we're afraid to talk about things. We're afraid to do anything because companies, and I like the word you used, Jim. You said conditioned. Companies and people have been conditioned to be so fearful of everything. And when Homer says, you're afraid to be human, it's kind of what the system has conditioned in us. It's told us that it's scary to be human because humans are obnoxious sometimes. We hate things. We're annoying. And if you're any of those things, then, well, someone's not going to buy from you. You're not going to get that promotion. You're not going to get that, you're not going to get that bonus. So we play this role, but The reality is, and I think every one of us could probably attest to this, is that when you break outside of being Flanders, that's when the amazing things start to happen. It's okay to be obnoxious. It's okay to hate things. It's okay to have opinions about things. And not to say be crazy and out there and not wade in your opinions and how you interact, but it's also okay just to be a human. I mean, that's what
Yeah,
we are.
it it is, and I would say maybe sometimes it isn't though, because we've been conditioned through being penalized or punished for doing that in sometimes. And I'm not talking, me specifically, but I think the perception is if I am that person, I'm not, Flanders at the office, then I'm not going to get that raise. I'm not going to get the stock options. And my family is dependent on that. My mortgage is dependent on me being able to do that. My boat payment is dependent on me being able to do that. And so I think there's something greater to be said around maybe the relationship between one's ability to be personal and pull it off without giving a shit versus how much they've created a dependency on not rocking the boat for themselves financially, and maybe being more Flanders than they normally would be. And I think we ought to um, always reference this person as Flanders now for moving forward.
I like it. It's really good, isn't it?
Now, do you think it's intentional or it's just something that has organically happened? Because I mean, I have an opinion as to which one. I'm curious
I
to see
think
what you
I think
think.
it's been conditioned, but I also think this is a much broader topic, but the overstretching of people's need for things that drives financial decisions that they make creates massive dependencies on a job that they shouldn't have, right? And so I think that alters behavior in a certain way. But that's a much bigger topic around just
No, but
consumerism in general, right?
but it is an important topic because again, if this is where we're spending the bulk of our time and our energy, and that's the driver, isn't it important to have that conversation? It's essentially what you're saying, Bryant, is that you're a prisoner. You're basically electing to be a prisoner. That's what it sounds
I'm
like to
not.
me.
I'm
No,
not.
no, no.
But
That's
but
what
but I
I'm
think
not. So, but when you're
yeah, I
what
know
I'm
you.
saying
I
is
know. I'm teasing you back there because you said you, but yeah. The proverbial you, the Flanders is right. They have created themselves. They have created a prison around themselves, and um, it actually makes me think about even broader topics around like mental health and the state of affairs with that for people in offices and the things that you see there. But um, yeah, I think people just they leverage themselves so much financially that they are scared out of their mind of losing that job, and they will do anything to keep it at the expense of a personal relationship.
well, and at the
So
expense of their mental health. I mean,
totally.
I think that that's the opposite of serenity. There's it just seems like you may have a comfort level of maintaining a certain lifestyle, but ultimately, how much are you going to be able to enjoy that if you lack serenity because you are a prisoner to someone else's approval? And again, not to say that we're anarchists and we're off doing kind of our own thing, but to a degree, I just think it is very unhealthy for employees to willingly choose to be a prisoner in that scenario. Just from a mental health perspective that you bring out, like we're seeing in business, especially in tech, huge issues with mental health and depression and part of it is most likely chemical and hereditary, but a big part of it is a very, very toxic environment that we've put ourselves into.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I'm going to get into it. I think some of it is intentional. It's by design to create. I'm going to say it, disposable employees, or employees that will burn themselves out for not just fear of not getting that promotion, but for fear of being fired. Um, it's because I think it's ingrained in people. You do what you need to do to maintain that job. in order to continue to live a life. And because I think a lot of people get stuck in that keeping up with the Joneses kind of mentality, which creates this vicious cycle. Now, when I say is it intentional, do I think there's one person? Do I, let's continue using our Simpsons analogy. Do I think we have one single person in the form of Mr. Burns going, excellent, excellent? No, but I think it's a combination of multiple things. But I think there's definitely some drivers that are saying if we can get people into this state, we then have employees we can abuse.
If there's not a book out there that uses The Simpsons as a foundation for talking about business norms and ethics, then there's a huge missed opportunity there.
There was a book out there that I have. I don't know if it's still in print or not, called The Simpsons in Society. Now,
Oh, really?
this
That would be a
was
fascinating read.
was written maybe 15 years ago. I got to pull it out and read it again. But of course, the author uses like the early seasons to compare it. Like the more recent seasons aren't nearly as satirical as the early seasons are. But quick aside, yes, The Simpsons in Society. That was a book that I read at one point.
Fascinating, fascinating. So, I guess like with a lot of these topics that we choose, what word did you use, Bryant? You said it was it wasn't. Did you say philosophical or something even deeper than that?
The
We
philosophical human need.
we tackle these really really big topics and stuff that like I'm sure people have been wrestling with much smarter than me for sure for a long time. But hopefully we get people thinking about things. And again, I'm okay being challenged. I think we take a very specific view of the world, and it's easy to say, I pick up this grain of sand and it represents the whole world, and I know that that's not fair and isn't the case. But what kind of things can we take away from this conversation? I guess as employees, we started the conversation out talking about our view of the importance of being personal when it comes to business, and we kind of morphed that into the reason we're having this conversation is because if we don't have this environment.
Dad,
What's up?
Dad, the front door's locked. Derek's here, but it's locked.
Okay, I'll open it. All right, you guys talk. Hold on.
I think it just got personal. Oh, you're muted. Jim, you there?
Well, that'd be funny enough. I was talking and I was muted. So yeah, that is the perfect example of it getting personal and unfiltered.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
so we're waiting for Jason to come back. I actually just thought of something. Before we start to wrap up. I mean, they're talking more and more about the impacts of social media and what that has, what that's done with society and even just interpersonal relationships. Do you think maybe taking social as an example, I have to project a certain image to get a certain number of likes, right? Seeing like the number of likes or comments on a picture or status update or whatever. I mean, that there's a dopamine hit there that makes you feel good. So in the same way, do you think people don't want to be personal in business so that they're liked?
I don't know, because I think the ones that are personal are liked the most. Um,
Or let me rephrase that. Like maybe it's they project a certain image to be liked. Maybe
yeah,
this goes from
yeah,
being personal to being genuine.
yeah. It's. I think that's really poignant, and it's interesting when you have perceived understandings of who people are, and then after somebody has left the company, and then others come out and they're like, oh, you know, this so and so was such a different person, for us as people that were being managed by that person, and behind closed doors, it was a very different reality. I think there's a lot of that takes place as well, just being two faced and inauthentic, or you said genuine. I don't think there's a lot of authenticity with people, which is unfortunate. But I don't think that's isolated in business either. I think
That's become life, I think, especially
Yeah,
with the
I
advent
think
of social media, is
totally.
projecting this image that will get you the likes, the superficial friendship and whatnot.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm back.
We said that you made it personal just there.
That was totally staged. All right. So I think what I was asking, and maybe you talked about it, but I was asking like, so I was basically setting up the question of we started out this conversation talking about the importance, at least from our perspective, of making business personal, and we kind of were going down this path of from a business perspective it makes sense, and we kind of morphed that conversation into it's important from a mental health standpoint, that we treat it with the respect that it needs, that these things are important at the individual employee level for maintaining some level of mental health. What advice do we have, at least for people to think about, for like what's important in the way that we work? What questions am I working in an environment? Am I working with a supportive company where these things are open and being talked about?
Well, there's that, and I think it's also asking yourself, are you around genuine people? Because what we were just talking about, right before you got back was, I brought up the example of social media and people projecting an image to get the likes, the retweets, whatever. We've actually talked about that on a previous episode too. So to kind of go off of that, like I would also ask yourself, am I around genuine people? Genuine people that will help me be genuine, because a person I worked for years ago said, the the most toxic of environment will make the best of people turn toxic themselves. So it's making sure you become who you're around. So if you want to be genuine yourself, part of it starts with you, but then it's also seeking out those that will be genuine back, that will be real back, that will allow you to get to the personal level.
Yeah, and here's a really good simple test that anybody could do as part of just kind of finding that out for themselves is when you're meeting with your supervisor or your boss's boss and talking to them, evaluate how much they talk about their needs from you versus your needs that they can support, and identify whether or not all you are to them is an asset to help them out in their career, or if they're truly interested in you as an individual and what you might need to make your job or your day-to-day better or easier.
I like that. And I think that that's one of the hardest things. And I'm going to be honest, I have a really jaded view of the business world, in that from the bulk of my interactions, it seems like most people are just really concerned about themselves. And I've always been really guarded when dealing with people, thinking that that's the perspective that they're taking. But it's so refreshing and it's so healthy. And the paradox of it is that more people become successful and happier when you think about others. I want someone to challenge me to tell me that that's not how the world is, but it just seems like, to that point, Bryant, most people honestly are just out to save themselves, and could care less about the rest of the team or anybody else for that matter.
Yeah, I find that you really have to put up your guard for yourself in a lot of cases. And again, I was saying this to Jim while you were away for a second, Jason, that we're talking about this from a business perspective, but it's really just a life and current state of the world and society perspective, that in general, people are looking out for themselves first, out of just selfish behavior, whether it's driving your kids to school and that other person cuts you off as you're going there, or standing in line for a ride at an amusement park and somebody decides they need to cut in front of you because it's up to them. Like there's so many relations outside of business around just the inability of people to think beyond themselves and the impact they have on others, negative or positive.
So how do we change that? And can one or two people make a difference? And I guess we're probably really getting off topic here, but it's also interesting timing. And I tell this story not to say that I'm like a good person, but I tell it almost the opposite. So yesterday I was driving down to the grocery store, pouring rainstorm. I'm driving up this road. I see a motorcycle laying on its side, and a guy standing next to it. And he's kind of trying to push it up, and just eventually just kind of standing there. I watched 3 cars drive past him, and then what did I do? I drove past him, and then I get up the street a little bit, and I stopped in the middle of the road. I'm like, and I think I said it out loud. I said, "What the hell is wrong with me?" And I flipped a U-turn, went back. I'm like, dude, you need some help? He's like, yeah, I put my bike down. I can't push it up myself. But we're so, I tell that story not to like say, oh, I helped someone. I'm a great person. I'm like, no, I passed him by too, but it's just seems so natural. We're just so self-focused, self-centered. But I don't think we're happy because of it. I think we're happier when we let that down a little bit and help others and put ourselves out there. But how do we change that? Again, in this landscape, it just seems so overwhelming that that's how we operate. Can a few people, can a couple businesses make a difference?
We can with those that we interact with, making grains, sweeping societal changes. I'm more pessimistic about the ability to do so, but I can tell you since I've joined and seeing the relationships that are here with the clients that we've worked with, I know we're making a difference with those that we're interacting with, and I've heard that directly from those individuals and our clients.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you posted something on our internal Slack this morning to that, and I think it's important to realize that, in that if you try to look at this bigger thing that you're trying to solve, it's so overwhelming that we really can't make a dent. But if we focus on our little circles, that we can make a difference. And we've definitely seen that. I know Jim has some examples with companies he's worked directly with, that taking that personal caring approach has made really impactful differences in people's lives, and it's really, really amazing to see that. And for me, it gives me a lot of hope, and really energizes me for what we're doing. I mean, the work is, I don't want to diminish the work, that it's secondary, but the work is almost like comes second, right, to that relationship and caring for people. And just that we happen to be really good at analytics, and optimizing businesses is assumed, but helping people out because we're humans, that to me is what I feel the best about. Hippie Jason manager philosophy.
Yeah. And I want to go back to what you asked a moment ago, because you were talking about, can one person make a difference? And I agree with Brian's point. Grand sweeping societal changes, no, but I think you can make a difference in just individuals' lives. And this is going to sound so corny and so cheesy. But I've noticed when I try to make this personal effort myself, it actually rubs off on people. Like if you ever, just something as simple as, say, holding a door or nodding to someone, saying hi, or, you go up to like a counter in the store and you actually genuinely say, hi, how are you doing? Like little things like that. Like I've seen people's faces change. And believe me, don't get me wrong. I have those days where I am in just a really shitty mood, and it's like the wrong person touches the wrong nerve, and it's not going to be pretty. I am not Ned Flanders and happy-go-lucky all the time. But the point I'm trying to make is like, can you make a difference? Yeah, because I think we have been just conditioned to just be just cold and out for ourselves in general. So I think if people do want to make a change, I think it's as simple as like just addressing other people that you come across in life as just other human beings, and just a nod, a smile, a hi, how are you, a simple greeting, that could make someone feel much better, and I've seen that happen. And again, that sounds so corny, but I think it's true. At least I believe it to be.
It is. I'm behind that. So that should be the challenge that we leave our listeners with, is that we should be a little bit more deliberate in being kind and human with each other. Again, in the business world, we're spending the majority of our time in these relationships. And to your point, Jim, the littlest things can have a ripple effect that you may never know the extent of the influence that you have. And in a world where it's become very, very cold and uncaring, I think we need a few islands of hope of people being, caring and warm for each other, and we can definitely do that in the business world. And I think the risks are very minimal compared to the value that can come out of being human.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Cool. So I think we can get and wrap it up there. Bryant, any closing thoughts on your side?
Just take the opportunity and find out if you're in that environment or in a culture in which it is people are self-serving or out to help others, and make a decision on how much longer you can last in a situation in which it's self-serving. I know for myself, there's been many instances in which I've had to make different decisions on what to do based on different dynamics and cultures that I was present in. So put that out there for everybody else.
Awesome. This is a good conversation. I went in a direction that I wasn't anticipating, but I think the destination we got to is a really important one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, this did not end up where I was expecting it to. It totally went somewhere else. So, cool. So we'll go ahead and wrap up for there. We're going to wrap up at that point and talk to you both later.
Yeah. And Bryant, join us anytime.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to reach us, you could do so by emailing podcast@33sticks.com or on the web at www.33sticks.com. The 33 Tangents podcast is a production of 33 Sticks.